There is a reason why people go to law school. Do not think that you can draft your own contract. Bad idea. But you may use a great template that comes from a trusted source.
You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions, presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in. All right, listeners, welcome back to the latest episode of Customer Growth Sessions. Today, I'm thrilled to have on Steffi Schmidt, former corporate lawyer turned founder of Fig for Kids. Steffi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on today.
I'm so excited to have you on. I want to start out talking a little about your background, and then we're going to get into broadly what we'll call guidance on the legal side of starting a successful e-com brand. Listeners, so Steffi spent the past 20 years prior to starting Fig for Kids working in corporate law. She's in that time advised everything from small startups to some of the largest brands in the world. Today, she's working on Fig for Kids. She founded the company a couple years back. Really what they do at Fig for Kids is they are a clothing brand focused on bringing non-toxic clothes to the US market, specifically for children. So with that, Steffi, that's obviously a pretty big career shift, going from corporate law to starting an e-com brand. What started the transition? What inspired you?
Great question. And I still have moments where I surprise myself that I made the shift, knowing that I spent so much time in the legal world. I think for me, it was a progression. I still love being an attorney and loved all of, my years working in big law, but I had a personal catalyst that really shifted my perspective on what I wanted to be focusing on. For me, it was a moment that I could not shy away from. My mom was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer, and we as a family took stock of our entire lifestyle. And one of the things that we did in exploring sort of how we could potentially live a less toxic lifestyle and perhaps avoid some health risks was looking at our clothing. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy to most people. I say that and they say, why would you look at your clothing? That is not relevant at all to our health. But ironically, it's one of the most toxic aspects of our day-to-day as families that we just don't take stock of. So the obvious ones are food and skincare and home goods. So you often see people talking about clean beauty and organic strawberries and organic sheets, but rarely do you hear people talking about an organic t-shirt. That is just more far-fetched for people to consider as an area where they might be letting toxins into their lives. But when you have someone who's diagnosed with, the type of cancer that my mom has, and you have to take really a holistic picture of your lifestyle, that's something that comes into play. And at the time I had little kids. And so these concerns were obviously most relevant as a mom to me with respect to their health. And I started doing my research on what types of toxins are in clothing, what some cleaner options are, and found that pretty much everything I was sourcing was coming from Europe, where the regulations are much more stringent than here in the US. While at first this was fun, and I would go visit my sister in the UK or family members in Germany with empty suitcases and come back with clothing hauls for my kids, at some point with 3 kids and a career, this felt like perhaps there was a better way. And while I was working as a lawyer, I just started exploring, are there brands in the US that are similar to the brands that I'm sourcing in Europe? No, there are not. The ones that are available are not anything that I would want to purchase for my children. They're either the wrong fit, or they're not the right item, or the sizing is off. And so this crazy idea sprang to life. And I thought, well, what would it really take to manufacture something like that here? Could I even do it? I don't have a background in clothing design. I know nothing about e-commerce other than how to, talk to them about preventing certain legal outcomes that are unfavorable. And it just became this side hustle hobby for me that I, for about 5 years, just held on to and found myself constantly coming back to. And then at some point, I just took the leap because it had become more than an idea.
I love that. I love that. So I'm curious, shifting from corporate law to running an e-commerce business, how much of that corporate law experience would you say really translated to the e-commerce, call it the e-commerce entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah. I don't think I even was aware of how much overlap there was. For me, it felt like a hard stop from being a lawyer and a fresh start into entrepreneurship with an entirely new skill set. For most founders, I suspect that's how starting a business feels. You are deeply aware of your shortcomings and you don't give yourself enough credit with respect to what you do bring to the table. I think that is probably true for every single founder that you ever meet. For me, I don't think I understood, ironically, having advised plenty of companies, how much operational work goes into running a full scale business. I thought that it was much more about the manufacturing, production, and sales piece. And those are, of course, huge aspects to running a successful business. But if you don't have your shop running smoothly, and your operational aspects of the business on lock, then all the rest of it is essentially for naught because those will end up costing you more than you make in any scenario. So for me, I think I really realized how much that legal skill set was going to be an asset once I started setting the business up properly. And I think that's the first inflection point for most founders where they realize, yeah, I need to talk to a lawyer, which for me was great because not only could I save money and time, but made me realize maybe I can do this, even though it feels like entirely crazy to go from being a corporate lawyer to a clothing brand founder. Simple things like what's the structure of the business going to be? What am I going to do in terms of, the equity component and the capital management? How am I going to deal with things like sales tax? What contracts am I going to use with vendors? Those were all things that I had to decide early on that made me realize that I was in a good position to do a big chunk of what needed to be done to launch the business.
Maybe this is a good time to add in the obligatory legal disclaimer. Listeners,
Yeah.
we're not attorneys. Well, one of us is. This is not legal advice.
Yeah.
Please consult with an attorney. Take this as general business or maybe not even recommendations, general business experience from Steffi, someone who's done a lot of this over the years. Steffi, what I would love to do, I'd love to pick your brain on maybe starting out some of
Yeah.
those early stage legal side of things. What would be, I think, really helpful to listeners is if we can touch on some of those elements at a high level, knowing that one,
Absolutely.
legislation changes. So listeners, certainly do your own research. When we talk about things like state sales tax, go read online once we talk about Nexus and all that sort of stuff to learn about your individual state and your own requirements. Um, I would love maybe if we can start out. Let's actually start sales tax because that's something I've
Yeah,
only been starting to learn about in the past couple of months here.
definitely.
Talk to me about Fig. You launch. How do you approach sales tax from day one?
Right. So I think thinking like a lawyer often feels very out of reach for people because law school experience and lawyers love for you to believe that you need a lawyer for everything. But a lot of this is just critical thinking and risk management. And as a founder, those are things that you have to do whether you're a lawyer or not. That's just good advice. For sales tax, I've had a lot of founders that I'm in touch with tell me, I didn't even pay it for the first year, which as a lawyer, I'm like, that's crazy. How did you manage that? And also, how did you sleep at night? But look, if you're listening to this podcast and you're realizing, oh, I don't think I've been paying sales tax either, it's always better to start now than to say, well, we'll wait and see if that becomes an issue for me later. This is definitely one that you would like to sort out. And it's actually less complex, I think, than people perhaps think it is. Anything that has the word tax in it feels overwhelming to people, but there are services out there that you can set up and automate. I started with Avalara. My husband, who worked at Trello, had a relationship with them. That was more than I needed. And then I shifted over to TaxCloud. But I think just take a look at what some of these services offer. set yourself up for success. You can start with very low minimums and, it's worth the 10, 15, $20 a month that you're paying these services who basically will connect to your Shopify, track the sales tax that you're charging and collecting, hopefully, which is something that you can do in your Shopify shop, and then let you know when you have a report that you need to review. And if you are willing to pay for them to file the reports, which I think is also relatively minimal, then they can do that for you too. And it just becomes something as simple as setting this up and just making sure that you review it on a quarterly basis. Depending again on the state, it might be a quarterly expense. Other states, it's more frequent or it's less frequent, depending on how much sales tax you're collecting. It might be annual, but this is a big headache if you let it ride and then have to clean it up later, and it can be expensive. It is a matter of one day if you go in, look at these services, pick one, set yourself up, and pay for it. I think that's my best advice for pretty much anything. Like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, certainly when it comes to paying the IRS.
Absolutely. Now, with state sales tax, let's say I'm selling across the US, is it a scenario where, day one, let's say I've sold 10 units in 10 different states, do I need to have sales tax set up in all 10 of those states and the other 40 states as well from that very first sale?
Yeah, basically. I think that with sales tax, a lot of it is cumulative. So there are certain thresholds that once you cross, you have an obligation to file. And so if you're not starting to take stock of what those amounts are that you're charging, then you may not be reporting accurately when the time comes. So some will not make you charge sales tax until you cross a certain threshold. Some won't make you charge sales tax at all, depending on what your product is. These are things, again, that some of these services in Shopify can help you toggle on and off, but you do have to do the work to get in there and make sure that you're providing accurate information so that the tracking can be appropriate to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Could you talk to us a little about some of the different business structures? And we don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to hit on every single one, but would love if we can talk about, LLCs, S corps, you name it, maybe a couple of the big ones.
Definitely. So I think the LLC is what most people are familiar with. And I think for most people, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Again, not legal advice, but that's probably the most appropriate structure. A lot of it relates to whether or not you have plans in the future to take on venture funding. Venture really likes to have an LLC. They don't want a partnership or a C Corp. And yes, if you are a C Corp or you are an LLP and you decide to take on venture funding down the road, you can reorganize into a different structure. But this is a perfect example of get it right out of the gate. Think about maybe what your 5 or 10 year plan is, and then just, set it and leave it rather than I'm just going to wing it, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And then 5 years later, you're trying to raise money and you realize, oh, this is something that I'm going to have to fix, invest money in, maybe hire lawyers. Now it's much more complex. I think this is another one that you have to think about in the context of, are you a solo founder? Do you have employees? Are you going to have an equity plan at the outset? Those are things that will inform the type of structure that you end up opting for. And have a chat with your accountant, right? I mean, if you have an accountant, and if you don't, probably time to get one. Things are going to get more complicated if you own your own business. Have a chat with, your financial advisor if you have one. I think one of the biggest flex as a founder that you have is to not be shy about asking questions. People are happy to answer questions. I get text messages and calls all day long from friends who are like, hey, I got this letter. I'm happy to help. Then I go and my friend returns the favor. She has expertise in sales and marketing, and I have no clue what I'm doing running a meta ad. So I think that don't be shy to ask questions. Talk to as many people as you can, get as much information as you can, and then make an educated decision for yourself. But don't shy away from these big decisions because at some point you will be sad, very sad, if you just kind of avoided it because it felt complex at the outset.
Brilliant. Let's dive into intellectual property. I think probably patents and trademarks would be the most relevant ones here. Can you give us an overview of what those two are?
So I think everybody who has an idea thinks, oh my gosh, like the first thing I need to do is get a patent or a trademark. And these are very amorphous concepts for non-lawyers. And there are a lot of things out there that you can't patent, or you can't trademark because it's not really a bespoke idea in that way. On the other hand, if you do have something that's very unique, some kind of a design, and you don't protect it, that could be your entire business. The one that comes to mind is those, gosh, I'm forgetting the name, but those exercise band. Oh, the TRX, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the TRX. If my personal trainer is listening to this, he's going to be very proud of me that I'm bringing the TRX band into my podcast about founding a business and giving legal advice. But the TRX band is not a very complicated device for anyone that's used it. And at the same time, the design is the entire business. And if you have something like that, that is unique, even though relatively straightforward, and you don't protect it, you better believe you're going to find lots of versions of it on Amazon for half the price a year into launching, and you will no longer have a competitive edge. So think about the type of product that you have. Think through whether or not you think it's something that has a unique design, and then explore whether or not that's something that can be protected. I think other areas where this concept comes into play that most people perhaps don't think about are your website domains. So there are a lot of trolls out there that love to buy up website domains that may be relevant to you, will come knocking on your door 6 months into launch and say, hey, by the way, if you ever want to expand into France, or if you ever want to expand into Germany or what have you, I essentially have the domain for your company's website for this country. My advice is once you pick a name, once you pick a website domain, buy up anything that you think might be relevant. Because here's the thing, that's going to cost you $10 a year or something like that. Unless you have some crazy domain name that's 3 letters, which nobody does. And I mean, you'll note we're not www.fig.com. But if you, purchase figforkids.info, figforkids.com, figforkids.eu, the list goes on. Think of the top 10, right? It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. Think of the top 5 or 10 that might become relevant at some point to you. Pony up the $10, and then you've got yourself some protection down the road if you want or need to expand, rather than at some point saying, great, we have to settle with this individual for $100,000 to get this domain because now we decided, we want to sell in a different space, or we have something that's tangentially related to our business and we need that domain name. I think other areas are, with simple, aside from the design and textiles and things like that, in particular, if you have, certain artwork and things like that, color combinations, there are a lot of things you can protect. Some of the onus falls on you as an owner, founder, inventor to think about how is what I am selling unique and what is that uniqueness that needs to be protected above all else, and focus on that.
Hey, listeners. If unpredictable revenue is keeping you up at night, this is for you. Most e-commerce brands don't have an advertising problem. They have a predictability problem. Pat from Intergrowth here. We help brands to build a profitable meta ad system for their business within 90 days. If you're interested in learning more, go to intergrowth.com/CGS to book a strategy session with our team. Once again, that's intergrowth.com/CGS. Could we expand upon that, talking maybe just about a basic trademark search? Because I know that's something we really got wrong from the get-go with the previous company name that we had. We used to be Junto, and
Yeah.
ended up having to change that one over the
Yeah.
years. But could you
Name
tell us a little
changes are
about that?
common, I think. And I would be interested to hear from you how that affected your business. Was that something that was expensive? Do you feel like you lost customers? I wonder about this often myself in advising companies, like how important it is to get that one right at the outset. Obviously, as a lawyer, you're coming from the vantage point of you have to get everything right. right away. As a business owner, and this is where I think, I loved being a general counsel more than I even loved working at a law firm, because you have to be a practical lawyer in a way that you don't if you're working at a law firm. But practically speaking, I think the search is important. I think you should pick a name that is not going to be out there, that you're pretty confident no one else is using. But if you have to change, to me, that's not a business ending mistake in the way that other things could be, like, for example, not protecting your invention.
Totally agree. In in hindsight, what I really wish that we had done is just a free trademark search, because we didn't even do that from the onset. And as soon, I forget what stage it was, but I think it was actually that we were going to apply for a trademark
Mm-hmm.
for the name Junto, and we did just a free trademark search on
Yeah,
USPTO, and we found that there was another company that already had the trademark rights for that. I think it was in the context of marketing services, which is exactly what
got
we
it.
do. Uh,
Yeah,
we never got a cease and desist from them, but it was more so a case where we said, okay, our business is at this stage. If we ever want to
yeah,
get to the next tier, we're running a risk that we're going to get that cease and desist, and we're going to have to go
definitely.
through this really expensive rebrand. Let's do it now,
Yeah,
and in hopes that, the little bit of brand equity that we're going to lose, we can rebuild it, knowing that it's not going to be as expensive as it might be if we wait 5
yeah.
years, let's say, for it.
Well, and frankly, unless you have tons of money, which who does nowadays, even if it's not your own, and in many cases, at least a portion of it is, every dollar counts. And that is not the type of thing you want to be spending money on if you could be spending it on customer acquisition and other things like that. It's expensive. I mean, it costs money to all the branding stuff, your brand identity at the beginning, and your logo, and it costs time, and money and time are just things that founders don't have enough of. So again, I think that's a great one to point out, because it's a free search and it gives you essentially all the information that you need, and it can prevent, a lot of headache down the road. So, and you don't have to be a lawyer to do that. You don't need to pay a lawyer to do that. That is free and available to everyone who's starting a business.
So maybe the next bucket that we jump into is talking about contracts a little bit.
Yeah.
Running
Oh,
an
this is
e-com
my
shop.
favorite.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. This is the
Says
top.
no one but
Everyone's
me.
on the edge of their seats right now hearing about contract law.
Exactly.
So where do we want to start out talking about contracts? Obviously, it's a
Yeah.
huge part of running an e-com business.
Yeah. Well, as a lawyer, I love reading contracts, and that is something that most people are not passionate about. I do think that every contract must be read. Let's start there. If you are starting a business, whether you have a business, a legal, a medical, whatever background, you have to be able to read things that you're signing. It sounds wild to say that out loud to me, but I know lots of people, including founders that I have advised as their legal counsel, who get something, click it open, sign it, send it back, and have the attitude essentially that no one's ever going to look at this again. Let's get going with the fun part, which is the business. And by the way, I don't want to wrinkle any feathers, because if I start trying to negotiate, they're going to walk away from the deal. In my 2 decades of being an attorney, I have never once, not one single time, and I've negotiated a lot of contracts, had anyone walk away from a deal because they were not interested in negotiations. At some point, if they were, that's probably not a contract you want to sign or someone you want to be in business with to begin with. So rule number one, read it. If anything sounds unfamiliar, ask a question. You cannot sign things that you do not understand, because no judge or mediator is going to look at you down the road, if it ever does come to pass, and say that that's an acceptable excuse for why you signed something. You can't say, well, I didn't know what I was signing. Read it. If you don't get it, Google it, ask Claude, text your friend who's a lawyer, read it again, highlight it. I think that there are lots of terms that people start to become familiar with: confidentiality provisions, termination provisions, payment terms. You'll get more comfortable the more contracts you read and review. And there's no harm in contacting the person who sent you the contract and saying, I don't understand this provision. Can we have a call about it? Can you explain to me what this means, what I'm signing? This is something that I don't agree to. We need to come to a different agreement. These are things that perhaps feel, when you're signing the contract, like they may never matter, but I promise you, 1 out of every 10 contracts will be something that you will go back and read down the road when you have an issue with a customer or a vendor and you say, I wish that I had not agreed to that. I wish that I had asked for termination on 30 days notice rather than 90 days notice. I wish that I had asked for, if there was a delay in shipping my product, that I would get a discount. I wish that I had not agreed that this broad confidentiality term was something that we were going to sign up to, et cetera, et cetera. I wish that I had not signed over some of my intellectual property. I wish that I had not agreed to indemnify them if something went wrong. That's crazy. I can't afford that. So if it's a huge contract, if it's something that if the dollar amount is worth more than half your business, hire a lawyer. If it's something where you feel like this is my whole business on the line, hire a lawyer. If it's something that's for a couple $1,000s, you're trying out a new vendor, they send over a contract, you probably don't need to hire a lawyer. You can do what I just described in terms of reading, asking questions, making sure you're comfortable with things. It's okay to say no. A lot of times you can take provisions out of contracts. The other thing that I'll say about contracts is there are a lot of great forums out there. Y2 Combinator is an excellent source for founders where you can get simple templates like non-disclosure agreements. If you're hiring employees, there might be employee agreements up there. Consulting agreements, if you're hiring someone on, an independent contractor basis. You don't need to draft these things from scratch. You should not. There is a reason why people go to law school. Do not think that you can draft your own contract. Bad idea. But you may use a great template that comes from a trusted source. There are big law firms out there that have templates that are available for free on their website. Do a little bit of homework, do a little bit of digging. Another one that I don't feel great about is you can ask other founders for what they have. Here's what I'll say about that. Take it as an example, compare it to some of the other things that you get. I do not like to use other people's forms because my business is not their business, and the things that I'm comfortable with may not be things that they're comfortable with, and maybe they never read it. Just because someone's using it doesn't mean it's good, but it is another data point. You can go to other founders and say, hey, what have you been doing for this? What have you been doing for that? And often they'll say, yeah, I use this. And by the way, I wouldn't recommend agreeing to this because that was a problem for me. So a lot of it, again, is just critical thinking, using the resources that are out there for free and hiring a lawyer and paying for it when it really matters.
Wow, that was amazing. Um, I,
I
I I
really am
wonder
a
if I can
lawyer.
come up. Yeah, I was gonna say I wonder if I can come up with any follow-up questions there.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on, are there any examples that come to mind specifically with Fig where,
Yeah. Oh,
call it
yeah.
taking the time to read through a contract, negotiate, which, as you
Yeah.
said, it can feel uncomfortable for a lot of founders. It feels,
Yeah.
to some people unnecessary, but any scenarios with Fig that come to mind that really
Yeah.
help to go through that
So
process?
this is a great personal anecdote. When I was placing my first production order, I did not understand the paperwork that went along with that process because I had never advised a clothing company. And the apparel industry is unique in and of itself. So I realized, they asked me for a purchase order and I'm like, oh, that, okay. I have no idea what that is. Let me find out. Let me ask people. Example, let me ask people what they use for purchase orders. I asked my friend, Aviva Stana, who has been doing, beautiful textiles for her entire professional career. She sent me an example. I asked Noah Arias, who's the founder of Bloomers, what does she use? I look at these examples. I look online. Then I drafted my own. I realized that there was a commonality in that some of these purchase orders had clauses that if there was a delay in production, that there would be a discount. 1 month delay, 10%, 2 month delay, 20%, 3 month delay, you pay for my shipment or whatever it is. As a lawyer who has never in the history of practicing handed in anything late, because in the legal world, that means you're fired. It did not even occur to me that if I was paying money for something, that it would not show up on time. I assumed, great, this is our production date. This is when I expect my items. To the point where I set up a photo shoot, for a week later, assuming, oh, that week buffer is, if anything happens, we're still good. A month comes and goes, no production. This feels weird. Okay. 2 months come and go, no production. 3 months come and go. Now we're talking real money because when I did finally get that production, I got a significant discount and they ended up paying to ship the entire production to me, which is not an insignificant sum when you're shipping 60 boxes of underwear from Portugal. That was a legal term that at the beginning I thought seems like a good idea to have in this purchase order, which is a legal document, essentially. Never, ever in my wildest dreams thought that it would matter. Mattered a whole bunch, saved me a lot of money. And in the end, was also fair, right? Contracts are really a bargain between two commercial parties. And if you are delivering something 3 months late, it is fair to have a term in there to say, you cost me money and time because that's product I can't sell and I lost money on that. So you have to make me whole. That is a legal framework, but it's also just common sense. So that was my first big contract win. I have a whole list. I mean, sometimes I wonder if I do FIG more for the practical experience of, being a lawyer in real life. But yeah, it matters. It definitely matters.
I love it. And I wanted to jump back. One thought that popped into my mind. We talked a lot about what I would broadly call like legal terminology. Now, when I think about FIG specifically, sustainability, sourcing of products, those are really important concepts to like the mission and the vision of the business. I mean, you and I have had whole discussions in the past about like specifically what you do on these
Mhm.
fronts. I think both for listeners, but also maybe for founders that are running clothing brands. Could you take a minute to talk through maybe how those legal definitions versus the reality of, product safety, eco-friendliness actually come into play? And we can talk about FIG specifically. That would be wonderful if you're
Yeah,
comfortable with that.
this is such a great question. I was actually on one of the Instagram reels that a friend of mine sent out into the universe about underwear being toxic, got, millions of hits the other day. And I was reading the comments as this relates to our business directly. And there was this uproar between parents among, this is crazy. You guys are just fear mongering. And then the other side of parents who are saying, no, this is real. There's studies on this. It's science and there are certifications. And I think as it relates to my world, that's really what I need to square for myself as I focus on what comes for FIG in the near future and what distinguishes us as a brand in this space. Because ultimately, the answer to the question of what are these terms? Are these certifications worth anything? Is this real science? Does it even really matter? Those are things that are product and brand defining for us. And I think for any other brand in the sustainability space, in particular, because there is so much greenwashing, and that's a term in and of itself. It means to basically hold yourself or your product out as being something that it's not as it relates to its safety, as it relates to its certifiability as a non-toxic or clean product. The terms that come to mind for apparel are terms that are thrown around in this universe: non-toxic, GOTS certified, OEKO-TEX certified, green, eco-friendly. Some of these mean something more specific than others. Some of them are just Webster's dictionary, look it up. It's kind of what it says it is. I think as it relates to us, the certifications are so meaningful because I think that puts a stamp on our product that elevates it to a level of authenticity that is differentiating from brands that just say, yeah, we use organic cotton. Because saying that you use organic cotton and having a third party certifying body that is the gold standard actually certifying your product, to me at least, is an entirely different statement, both to your customer and as a brand. It costs money and it takes time, and it's very involved to be certified in these ways. And for customers to whom it really matters because their skin is highly allergic to certain toxins or very reactive in other ways, or they have a family member with cancer. And so it matters a lot to them that they're just purchasing something that is not treated with certain very carcinogenic toxins. for those customers, that certification gives them peace of mind, and that's what they're paying for. And so I think in the apparel industry, certainly as it relates to children, I think brands need to do better if they are saying certain things to be able to back that up. I wish that everybody had, a sustainability pledge on their page like we do that makes it clear what they do and what they don't do and spells out what certain things mean and don't mean, because I think it can be overwhelming for customers to try and understand these terms, and brands throw them around wildly in a way that doesn't always make sense or amount to anything.
Wow, phenomenal. I think the last really big theme I'd love to pick your brain on is, I'm trying to think of a good encapsulating term for it. I'm going to say getting that first, I'm going to call it legal letter slash what might be
Oh,
perceived
yes.
as a legal threat in the mail.
Right. Yeah.
And
Terrifying.
you and I have chatted about this before. I'm going to leave
Yeah.
the company's name out of here because I think they're the type of company that would sue me if I mentioned them by name on the podcast.
I'll represent you for
But
free.
but you and I, well, first of all, for context, I mean, we run a marketing agency. We write blog content for a lot of clients. We have to be really rigorous about how we source images. So we pay for
Yeah.
commercial licenses for every image that we use for our own site, for client sites. This one company that comes to mind, which I know you've received notices from them as well in
Yeah.
a previous life, sent me a notice, I think it was like 3 months ago, claiming that I had gone against copyright and that they were going to sue me unless I paid some massive fine.
Yeah.
Looked into it, confirmed we did have commercial licenses for it. You and I have both done our own little bit of digging there and seen maybe this isn't the most
Yeah.
legitimate company in the world. But that's a reality. Sometimes there are going to be
For sure.
companies out there that are able to build a pretty profitable business with a lot of these threats. So first legal letter comes in the mail for your business. How do you approach that? Hey, listeners, if you're struggling to profitably acquire new customers, we're here to help. Pat from Intergrowth here. We've been helping e-commerce brands like Brevity, Cierto Tequila, Bella Bridesmaids, and more since 2016 to profitably scale their customer base. If you're interested in learning more, go to intergrowth.com/CGS and you can schedule a complimentary consultation with me. Once again, that's intergrowth.com/CGS.
Yeah. I mean, first you have a complete panic attack, right? Like we have to validate that that is terrifying for everybody, and staying calm is probably not going to be an option for most of us. It is really, really hard when you have your entire life on the line for these businesses, which, let's be frank, if you're a solo founder of a small business, you are pouring everything into it. To get a letter in the mail that feels like, first of all, I don't have the money for this. I don't have the time, and I didn't do it. It feels very personal. It's very upsetting. And those are all very real feelings. It can be overwhelming because in a lot of respects, people don't know what the right next step is. Here's my very straightforward advice for any scenario, whether it be the one that you just described or another one. It could be with respect to using someone's name or what have you. Don't panic after you've panicked, and try to take a very common sense approach. Don't respond right away. It's almost like, X is contacting you. Put your phone down, close your email, do not respond. Whatever you say in that moment will be a mistake and you'll regret it. That is my best advice for what to do in the first hour or two. After that, if you have a friend who's a lawyer, send them a copy and say, hey, what do you think about this? Start Googling the name of who sent you the letter. Maybe there's a Reddit thread. This is a troll. Maybe there's Google information about them. If it's coming from Weil Gotchel, my former employer, chances are you're going to have to respond. If it's coming from insert other name like Voldemort, probably don't need to respond. Certainly not right away. The first response should really be a question, not any offering of any type of information. Hold your cards close. Everything that you put in an email could be discoverable down the road if there is a legal issue. So ask questions before you offer information up. Only give information if you find yourself in a position where you're forced to do that. Other than that, never give any information. Ask a question. Hi, we don't think that this relates to us at all. A little bit more formal than that, but basically something along the lines of, we received this letter. We don't believe that this relates to our business. We're not aware of any insert, usage of a photo improperly. You can use plain English. It doesn't have to be fancy legal jargon. Please provide more substantiating evidence. See what they come back with, right? You can go back and forth a little bit like that until you get a sense of maybe there's some there, or they're totally bluffing. They don't have anything. Once you have a little bit more information about what they might have that could be valid, then you can set a course of action into place. If they send back some information where you're like, yikes, looks like we did do something here, maybe it's time to try and talk to an attorney. My advice there is, first of all, you don't owe any lawyer oh my gosh, all the lawyers listening to this podcast are going to be so mad at me. You don't owe any lawyers any money until you've signed an engagement letter. Okay? Don't sign anything with a lawyer either. Have a consult call. Honestly, any good lawyer is going to have an upfront consult call with you and not charge you. They might say, look, I don't think there is anything here. I took a look at the letter. I think you're okay. I think you can just respond with a couple words, blah, blah, blah. Or they might say, look, I've seen this before. I'm sorry, but we need to respond in due course and do this in a legal fashion because this is a real thing. There are good lawyers out there. There are bad lawyers out there. That is a real thing, unfortunately. Do your homework in terms of which lawyer is sending you the letter, not just the firm they're coming from. Ask around. I think that's probably my best advice. And, if I was really a glutton for punishment, I would give people my cell phone on this podcast. You can LinkedIn me. Maybe I'll respond.
I love it. Well, along those lines, because we've talked a little about looping in an attorney at various stages, state by state's obviously going to vary. Are there any platforms, any broad sites that you recommend listeners go to that might have a good pool of potential attorneys that they could work with within their own state for their areas of expertise?
Gosh, great question. I think it has to be word of mouth. It really does, because people hold themselves out to be something that they're not. People inflate their experience. They're on a billboard. You never know. You have to talk to someone who has worked with that person. Chances are in your network of founders, someone has a name. I get contacted constantly by people that say, hey, I have an employment issue in Massachusetts. Do you know anyone? I'm not a Massachusetts employment attorney, but I know people in Massachusetts who are. Or I have a friend who's a founder there, who's a general counsel, who I'm sure has had employee issues. And so I can ping him. Ask a friend, get a personal reference. Do not work with someone who you do not have a reference for. I think that is, when it comes to lawyers, it has to be a personal reference.
Oh, that's a great recommendation. I was going to say, our company has used a platform called UpCounsel a couple of years back. And I would say, granted, I can't speak for the platform today, but at the time there was a lot of good stuff on there, but it didn't have the greatest depth of attorneys. Yeah. I think we were looking at Washington, D.C. maybe. Didn't have a massive pool of attorneys within, whichever state we were looking into.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of looking word of mouth, reaching out to your network, especially people who might live in that particular state that you need representation for.
I think there's also this common misconception that if you're a lawyer, you can handle every single legal issue. And lawyers are like doctors. You don't go to a urologist if your eye's hurting. I have a background as a corporate attorney. I would not hire me to defend someone in court who's being deposed. You need specific attorneys with specific expertise, depending on what your legal issue is. And it's state specific, or it could be a federal issue. Those are different types of lawyers as well. Someone who practices state law is maybe not as fluent in federal law. It's very specific. That's why you need a reference, and you need someone who understands the type of law that's relevant to your issue.
Absolutely. At the risk of being really repetitive, can you give a quick overview on the state-specific requirements for a lawyer? Why can't I hire you if I'm looking for like Boston employment law, let's say?
Right. So when you take the bar exam and hopefully pass, you become a member of the bar in the state in which you took the bar exam. So for me, that's New York. This gets a little bit interesting because there are different states that have reciprocity, meaning if I am a part of the bar in New York, then there are other states that I naturally can practice in. There are other states that I can't. If you are in-house, like I was for many years, then you can give advice to your company globally, but you would hire an expert if you had to be in court, for example, in a particular state. You could show up on behalf of your client as counsel, but you would have to have someone who appeared in front of the court on your behalf. And there are things that can be filed to let you speak in court and such, even if you're not a member of the bar in that state. But you really do have to, for example, if you have an employee in Massachusetts, talk to someone who does employment law in Massachusetts, because it could be wildly different than the employment law that you have in California or New York or Florida. And it is. It's not a one size fits all deal. Lawyers, for the most part, the good ones know this, would not represent you in a state in which they're not able to give legal advice. But, people have different moral compasses. So again, do your homework, look at people's LinkedIn page, see, where have they practiced law? Oh, okay. They're in Illinois. I'm in Delaware. Maybe that's not the right fit for me.
Brilliant. We've covered so much on this episode, and I wanted to really just hand you the mic for a minute and see if there's any parting thoughts that are front of mind, particularly for listeners that either are about to launch and they're terrified of the legal side, they're
Yeah.
in the trenches right now and they're worried about contracts, or again, they got that first legal letter in the mail and they're trying to figure out how to respond. Broad strokes, what haven't we covered yet?
Yeah. I think don't sell yourself short. I have worked with founders who are more sophisticated than half of the lawyers that I know, truly. And a lot of it comes down to being the smartest person in the room as it relates to your business and understanding your space and industry best. You don't have to go to law school to understand certain regulations. If you can read and you have access to a library and the internet, you can inform yourself as well as any lawyer. How you apply that information is something that potentially, a lawyer might be able to do in a specific way as it relates to a pure legal issue. But do not sell yourself short. Don't assume you need a lawyer for everything. It can really be very costly as a business owner, but be prudent and smart about when you do engage lawyers, and then make sure that you're hiring the right ones. There's nothing more frustrating than spending money on a lawyer and feeling like you got an awful outcome because maybe the person didn't represent your interests better than even you could have done yourself. So I think a lot of founders shy away from these issues, whether it be something as straightforward as sales tax or something more complicated like an IP matter. But you owe it to yourself and to your business to become truly immersed in these issues and understand them better than anyone in the room. And if you're fortunate enough to eventually sell your business, have it be acquired or go public or anything like that, people will expect you to be in the weeds on all of these issues as well. So it's better to start from the ground up than to try and avoid these issues and leave them. They're not things you can purely delegate. So yeah, I think that's my advice. And that's been one of the more fun aspects for me in terms of building Fig, because it wasn't really an entire departure from the legal world for me. I use it every day in really meaningful ways. It's fun for me. I like it. It's incredible to see how that supports my business in ways that I think help us distinguish ourselves, specifically because we're a brand that does rely on our certifications and regulations to provide better products to parents out there and for kids. And I think it can become your superpower, to have something that is different and unique from what you're doing today, whether it be a sales background or a legal background, a marketing background, a medical background. Rely on what you know as a founder and lean into that heavily and help other people out. Be a good citizen, give people helpful advice, and then that will come around full circle to you. I'm always happy to help people out and answer questions. I think these things can be daunting, but ultimately are not maybe as overwhelming as they seem.
Brilliant. Steffi, this has been amazing. For listeners maybe that either have young kids of their own or their, aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, and they really want to get more sustainable clothing for those kids, where can they go to find Fig online?
Yeah. Check out our Instagram page. I'm really proud of it. It's fun. A lot of what Fig was meant to do was to take the guesswork out of making better choices as parents for parents that are mindful about these issues. A lot of educational stuff is on our blog because this is a universe that I knew nothing about. And we've got some great blog posts, less than a minute or two to read. And you can quickly inform yourself about toxins in textiles, what sustainability really means, what's the difference between organic cotton, cotton and bamboo. I've approached this from my legal background, so it's a trusted source for parents that are curious about these issues and want to learn more. I think that's where it starts. If you find out that it's something that you would like to start considering for your family, we have starter packs and potty training kits, and we've really tried to make it fun, easy, and approachable and offer it at a price point that is less than flying in your organic cotton textiles from Europe, which gratefully I no longer have to do for myself. So that's, check out our Instagram. Fig's website is, www.figforkids.com. I'm sure you'll put this in the show notes and such. Send us an email. We love hearing from customers. We're here to serve you. And yeah, just find ways to engage with us. And if you're curious, learn more.
Brilliant. And Steffi, exactly as you said, we'll share all these links in the show notes, listeners. So check out Fig for Kids on Instagram, check out their website, add Steffi on LinkedIn, sparingly send her messages
Yes,
on the legal front.
exactly.
Steffi, this has been amazing. Once
Yeah,
again, listeners,
so fun. Thanks so much for having me.
our pleasure. Once again, listeners, this is Steffi Schmidt, the founder over at Fig for Kids. Steffi, thank you for coming on today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.